last minute and you end up sitting in the front row. Well, ladies and gentlemen, good evening, and a very warm welcome to Windsor Castle, and in particular here to the Waterloo Chamber. And thank you so much for choosing to support Films Without Borders, a charity which essentially helps young people from divided communities around the world and gives them the chance to tell their story through the medium of film. And I think the significant difference is they don't just get a chance to make the film, but we make absolutely sure that film gets screened by our relationship with distributors. Now, perhaps I ought to explain my connection. I'm a trustee of the Duke of Edinburgh's International Award, which has a presence in some 144 countries and territories around the world, and works with roughly 1 million young people every year. Now, one of the sections encourages young people to pursue and develop a skill, and that could be filmmaking. And last year, Films Without Borders sponsored 2 films in South Africa in partnership with the DofE, one of which involved a number of participants currently serving a custodial sentence in a young offenders correctional services centre, and the other was some participants from a township. And while my wife Sophie and I were visiting South Africa to mark their 30th anniversary of the President's Award for Youth Empowerment, which is the DofE in South Africa, both these films were shown to great effect during Gold Award ceremonies, and even to the patron of the President's Award, President Jacob Zuma. And we recently heard the brilliant news that one of the young lads from the townships has been offered an internship with Lionsgate Films to work on 2 of their forthcoming productions. And on behalf of Films Without Borders, I really want to thank Lionsgate, who are represented here this evening by Guy Ashalom, the CEO of Lionsgate here in Great Britain. Guy, where are you? Could you stand? Guy, thank you very much indeed. Now, it's my pleasure to invite onto the stage the patron of Films Without Borders to tell you a little bit more about the charity. Please welcome Nadia Swarovski.
Thank you, Your Royal Highness, and Your Royal Highness, lords, ladies, and gentlemen, I'm truly honored to become the patron of Films Without Borders. I'm humbled to share the stage with Sam Mendes and so many other inspiring and talented people here this evening. Jill's vision of Film Without Borders is as simple as it is powerful, and I greatly admire the team for the valuable work over the years. More than any other medium, film has the power to engage and inspire young people, no matter where they're from, with a universal language that transcends cultural, religious, and political boundaries. This small but impactful charity has shown that film can be a powerful force for good, with the potential to transform young lives. I very much look forward to working with Jill, Dalit, and their dedicated film crews to help empower many more young people, unleashing their creativity, finding their voices, and sharing their stories with the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Nadia, and it's great to have you as patron. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you for your support. Now, earlier I mentioned a potential internship for one of our filmmakers with Lionsgate. And to give you an idea what an internship involves and means, I'd like to welcome Anthony Hanin. Anthony is from the Lebanon and has recently returned from working in Australia. Anthony, the stage is yours.
His Royal Highness, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. I cannot believe I'm here in Windsor Castle. My name's Anthony and I'm 23 years old. I just graduated with a degree in media and film from Lebanon, and this is the most exciting summer of my life. My very first trip outside of Lebanon was 2 years ago, when Films Without Borders invited me to participate in their international program. That was a turning point in my life. At that time, I had dropped out of college and did not see any point in continuing. I live in Lebanon, which is a beautiful country, but it has been torn to pieces through wars and conflict. Even getting to school and college was at many times dangerous and scary. I did not see any point in continuing. There were no work opportunities, and Lebanon was in a permanent deep recession. When Jill invited me, I didn't think it would happen. Meeting His Royal Highness and the many famous people I met on that trip was surreal. It was an out-of-body experience, especially because it was my very first trip outside of Lebanon. I returned back home and enrolled back in college, and I felt the drive and passion I've never felt before. I felt that if I work hard, I can do something and be somebody. Last week, I graduated with distinction. Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Jill, and thank you, Films Without Borders. The internship that you helped me get last year in Sydney, Australia at SBS changed my life. My passion for film has never been stronger. And hopefully one day I will be able to help others the same way Films Without Borders have helped me. Thank you so much.
Films Without Borders, just like any other charity, relies upon dedicated, committed, and resourceful individuals. And Lady Nuttall is just one such person who's been the co-chair since the beginning. And I'm hoping she's going to tell us a little bit more about not just why she became involved, but more importantly, why she's still involved. Lalit, over to you.
Your Royal Highness, my lords, ladies and gentlemen, Anthony, that was wonderful. Thank you for being here and for sharing your work with us this evening. Films Without Borders is a creator of content that wins prizes, receives tributes, alters perspectives, and generates positive ripple effects throughout the homelands of our students. You have heard tonight as well how Nadia and her team at Swarovski can use our content to enhance their own important activities worldwide. The marriage between Swarovski and Films Without Borders represents a new direction for our cause, one that goes beyond creativity, beyond money, and beyond what you would think of as the typical charity, in the sense that we explore all possible collaborations between the body of content and the body corporate, the body of content being what our students learn through these filmmaking courses. While a picture tells 1,000 words, a moving image can spin 1,000 tales. And we all recognize the immensely positive power by filmmaking and its ability to break down internal and external barriers, create a dialogue, and build ever stronger bridges. Now, looking around this room tonight, I feel immensely grateful. Your generous donations will together enable the changing of so many disadvantaged teenage lives who will in their turn affect unquantifiable change in their local communities. And Jill Samuels, I think you're a tireless genius, one that has created the most cost-effective charity I have ever laid eyes upon. And together, we are all making Films Without Borders the charity of choice for the filmmaking industry. Now, looking ahead on our journey, I know that we will benefit most of all from sound advice. So I have a small request for those of you here in the audience that come from the commercial world. Please do come and say hello to me after the main event. And on that note, Your Royal Highness, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Lalit. Very nicely done. So anybody from the commercial world, you've been warned, okay? Now, it's my great pleasure to introduce our special guest, who, although some may consider is better known for his stage work, has proved that he is just as capable of mastering the world of film. Would you please give a very warm welcome to Sam Mendes. Thank you very much indeed. These are rather grand, aren't they?
Yeah, I think this is the closest I'm ever going to get to sitting in a throne. So I'm going to enjoy it.
Very good, excellent. And so just as a start, what drew you to filmmaking? I mean, we know that the stage side, but what drew you to filmmaking?
Well, I think that, I used to answer that question by talking about my university years when I grew to love movies. But I think really the answer is further back than that, is that I'm an only child. My parents divorced when I was very young, and I lost myself, I think, in films and television when I was a kid. Mainly, I have to say, television. And the things that were the people that were my gods when I was a kid were Python and Fawlty Towers and Porridge and Reginald Perrin. And a lot of what I've done since has been informed by some of the brilliant writing and acting that was on television in the early 70s. And then my dad used to take me to Woody Allen movies, and he was a little bit more risque, my dad. You know, he would try and slip me into, I remember seeing Manhattan and Annie Hall, which were quite, you know, I mean, I was probably only 10 or 12, and I wasn't strictly speaking allowed to go and see them. But I think that also, for me, that sort of impossible glamour of America and of New York, and that also informed my love of film and my desire to go and make American film, which is how I really started out in the film industry. Because in a way, it's quite an odd path that I've had, because the first English movie I made was Skyfall.
I was going to say, because what was your first movie then?
My first movie was American Beauty, yeah. Which, you know, it's all downhill from... And it's an interesting story, actually, because, you know, as you correctly said, my home has always been the theatre, and that's how I started. And it was theatre that got me that job, really. I did a production of Cabaret at the Donmar. I used to run a small theatre in Covent Garden called the Donmar Warehouse. I did a very, very small stripped-back production of Cabaret. And it went to New York, and we did a bigger version of it, and it was seen by many people. And, you know, I think you know this, so that when you're a hit on Broadway, it's almost like nothing else. And everybody seems to come to see it, your show. You know, on any given night, there are 20, 25 movie stars in the audience. And it was a real head turner for me. I just thought it was impossibly wonderful, that period of my life. And one of the first people to see it was Steven Spielberg. And my agent here said, look, it's probably time. Now is the moment. If you want to make a movie, you know, you can go out to LA maybe and meet a few people. And I said, I'm not sure, you know, I think I'd rather wait and read a script. I don't want to take general meetings. And then she said, Steven Spielberg didn't want to meet you. And I said, well, name the day, you know, when am I going? And the first thing that he did was he said, well, I've got three. He's an extraordinary man and a very brilliant mentor, encourager of other people. And he was pivotal in that movie and in my becoming a filmmaker, because I went into that room to meet Steven nervous and uncertain about whether I should or shouldn't take this step. And I said, what do you think? Why am I sitting here? He said, you can make a movie. No problem. Absolutely no problem. Just do it. He said, you can see from your work on stage. Just do it. Now, what should we talk about? There's 3 scripts here. We've got this script. We've got this script. And there's a little movie. It's probably a bit weird for you. It's called American Beauty. We don't really know what to do with it. We want to make it for no money. But I'll give it to you. It's an original, you know. And because he had handed it to me, you know, I had a little stack of scripts. That was the first one that I read. And I read it on the plane on the way back to New York. And I read it the first 2 hours of the flight. And I got to the last page, and then I started again, and I read it again. Because I couldn't believe, I thought either I've graduated to a point where now I'm going to be sent these extraordinary scripts, one after the other, or this is the best script I've ever read. And it remains, to this day, the best original screenplay I've ever read, by far. And it was just a complete fluke that I was given it. And I couldn't believe no one else wanted to do it. He was a major filmmaker. I thought, why aren't people queuing up to do this? And I said to my agent, literally as I got off the plane, I said, please, I want to do this film. And she said, okay, well, hold tight. There's a few people who've been offered it, but I think they're all going to turn it down. And one by one, after the movie opened, they all came up to me. You know, Mike Nichols, Robert Zemeckis, you know, Ron Howard. They all came up and said, we made such a mistake turning it down, but you made a really good picture, you know, and we're glad you did it. And so it was just one of those extraordinary moments of good fortune.
But then the trick is being able to read a script and being able to visualize it, and to be able to see the potential at it. Well, other people see it and go, how do you do that? Who wrote it, as a matter of interest? I should know the answer.
It was written by
somebody
man.
we never heard of.
No, actually, he's been very successful. His name's Alan Ball, not the footballer Alan Ball, but the Hollywood screenwriter who then went on to write 6 Feet Under and True Blood, which is currently an HBO series about vampires, both of which are outstanding pieces of work. But he had been a TV writer on a sitcom and was very angry about the way he'd been treated, was part of a writer team, felt very forgotten, and wrote this script out of a kind of rage. But also used many of the things he'd learned from sitcoms. So he knew how to tell a joke, but at the same time he had this immense amount of, he had this huge visual imagination. I mean, you ask about how to read a script, but very few scripts work on 2 levels, let alone 3, and I think this script, that script did. Often you'll get good characters, good dialogue, but you'll have a lack of scale, a lack of ambition, a lack of a mythic, if you like, within a story. Or you'll often get the mythic. You'll get the big concept-driven, action movie or the adventure movie. But there'll be no characters. There'll be no one on any journey. There'll be no friction. There'll be no tension. This had everything for me. It had scale, and yet it was domestic. It had wit, and it had sex, and it had daring, and it was dark and weird, and I loved it. And it was an unbroken good experience, except for the first 2 days of filming. Which was 2 of the worst days of my life. The whole experience was great, but those first 2 days, we're talking now the prehistoric days before digital, where you had to shoot on film, which is now, I'm afraid, and very sadly fast disappearing. But in those days, you had to wait at least a day and a half, 2 days before you watched what you had shot. So what I shot on my first day, obviously I didn't see to the end of my second day. And I sat down, all excited, in the screening room at DreamWorks, which was now the producer, run by Spielberg, and I watched what to this day remains the worst 20 minutes of film I've ever seen, which was what I'd shot on the first day. And I often point at this as the pivotal moment in my film career, because the luck of it was that I got everything wrong. The performances were bad, the costumes were wrong, the location was wrong, the lighting was wrong, the camera was in the wrong place. It didn't move. I hadn't done stage the background properly. And the reason that was lucky is because it was very clear to me I had to redo it. And I had to go to the studio and say, look, I made a mistake. Now I see how to direct film. I think I was being a bit frightened of it. I'd like to do it again. And from that moment on, weirdly, they trusted me, because they knew that if I felt it was wrong, I would say so. Had it been slightly wrong, I probably wouldn't have said anything. Had only one of those aspects been wrong, I probably would have left it. And I'm not sure I would have made the movie I did. But 2 weeks later, I was reshooting the scenes, and everything was different. A different location, different costumes, different lighting, everything. And I reshot that scene, and it's a scene I like now in the film. So there we are.
Fantastic. So it worked. It is a very different medium, isn't it, from the stage to being able to see. But you obviously then found it relatively easy to then adapt, and you sort of moved on from there. What are the major differences, though? I mean, you're talking about some of the aspects.
Yes.
What are the major differences between the two for you?
Well, I think that it is a completely different medium. I think that there are the similarity is an obvious one, which is you are telling a story to a group of people in a room for 2 hours. Boom. If you've worked in theatre, you know how to hold an audience, and you know when you failed to hold an audience. And I sat for hour after hour after hour in previews of play after play after play, listening to and feeling when an audience doesn't understand. You learn to read silence in a room, the silence of incomprehension as against the silence of fascination and, dead silence and alive silence, when people laugh, when people need a break. The rhythm of storytelling, I always like to feel a good movie breathes in and breathes out. So there's a sense of purpose always. Now that to have hour after hour of experience of telling stories to people, that was invaluable. But the technical aspects of filmmaking are completely different. You have to, I know it sounds incredibly obvious, but for those of us in the theatre, we are used to looking at a play from one angle only, which is through the proscenium, or if you're on 3 sides, but basically it's a front-on art. Cinema is 360 degrees, and it takes a while to get your head around the fact that you can shoot the scene from every and anywhere, above, below, from any angle. And that's a big difference. You also have to think in sequential images, so you have to know what cuts together. And you can be much more complicated about that, but ultimately it just comes down to that. Can I cut from this to this? Do the two things make music between the two images? Do they fit? Can you ever get to that point where 1 + 1 = 3, where that shot plus that shot create something completely other. And very occasionally, I mean, most of the time, filmmaking, like theatre, is a process of frustration for those of us who do it, and are perfectionists and control freaks like me. But sometimes you get it, and when you do, it's exhilarating.
Is there a part of the process that you enjoy the most? With filmmaking, that is.
Yes, I love editing. I think that editing in film is as close as you can ever get as a director to being truly the creator. I know it sounds wildly egotistical, but you're not. I don't write my own scripts. I'm not a good writer. I think I work with writers fairly well. But when you get into that situation where you have music at your disposal and you can lift huge chunks out of the film and change the order of things, and the story begins to flow, it's exhilarating. In theatre, I would say my favorite part of it is always rehearsals. Because again, that sense of freedom, that sense of loss of self-consciousness where you start to invent without thinking. And those are the two times when you really feel like you're a genuine, you're playing music rather than just being the conductor.
Brilliant. And I mean, you've talked about some of your influences in terms of the sort of television. Was there anything on and Woody Allen on the film? Were there others, or?
Yes, I suppose as I got to know more and more about film, there were key films. I did come out of a sort of English tradition of comedy. So a lot of the Ealing comedies that I learnt about through those television shows, and also the mid-period comedies that weren't Ealing, but weren't yet Carry On. So movies like Two-Way Stretch, Peter Sellers movies, I'm All Right, Jack, all that stuff. I loved all that period, very, very young. But then I got into American film when I went to university, and movies like, I presented a movie the other night at the BFI, which was a big influence on me, which was Paris, Texas, Wim Wenders' film, which showed me, in its boldest terms, that America's mythic landscape enabled you to make contemporary films that still had the scale of classic westerns or classic gangster stories. And so much of what I did as a director in my earlier days, like, for example, Road to Perdition, was an attempt to try and rediscover some of the thrill of seeing those movies as a kid, seeing the great gangster movies of the 30s and 40s, or even seeing The Godfather. And so in a way, it was a kind of fantasy to be able to do movies like that myself, to be able to enter that world, to direct, Paul Newman and Tom Hanks on the Warner Brothers backlot, dressed as gangsters, with Tommy guns. They're holding Tommy guns, for God's sake, That was such a thrill. In fact, I remember going to Tom Hanks. There was the last scene of Road to Perdition. It rained enormous amount. We had this huge rain towers everywhere, streets full of rain. And I was worried, we worked long, long hours, 16-hour days, and he was wet and cold, and he'd be shooting in this rain for 3 days. And I said, "Are you okay?" And he said, "Am I okay? I'm on the Warner Brothers backlot, dressed as a gangster, shooting Paul Newman with a Tommy gun. I was a busboy," he said, "Of course I'm okay," And there's something wonderful about it. I absolutely, associated with that feeling of just like, how is it possible for me to have got to this place, And there were moments where you look around and think, this is incredible.
The Road to Perdition had an extraordinary cast. In fact, most of your films have got the extraordinary cast. Are there any particular actors that stand out for you?
Paul Newman. I think he was a god, and remains to this day someone who I mentally refer to when I think about the way one should conduct oneself in life, not just in the entertainment industry, but just as a human being. The most modest, humble, intelligent, his perspective on life, I could go on for hours about him. But when I asked him to do the part, I thought he's never going to say yes. He was nearly retired at this point. He was, 75. And he had me up to his apartment overlooking Central Park, and he cooked me lunch, chicken. He did it all himself, He was much more excited about how he was cooking the chicken than the script that he had to talk about. He told me the detail. I can't cook for toffee, but he told me the detail. He got a bit of salt on it, and I wish I could remember his recipe because I'm sure it was very good. And then he opened the first page, and he went through every single line, every full stop, every comma. He said, "What about this? What have I said that? Why am I shooting this guy here? Why do I do that? What was my backstory? Where did I come from?" And he quizzed me for 3 or 4 hours. And it was great. They were all absolutely accurate and essential questions. And then he looked at me, he said, "Are you good at holding actors' hands?" And I said, "Yes, I'm very good." He said, "Let's do it." And that was a great moment, and he said yes. And I suppose I learned a lot from him. Judi Dench is the other person who I encountered as a young theatre director, age 24. I directed her in The Cherry Orchard at the Aldwych, and never has a director imparted less on an actor, and an actor imparted more on a director. You know what I mean? It was just, the student teaching the teacher. I mean, what was I going to tell Judy? I was 24, fresh out of Cambridge with all my theories about Chekhov, and there was Dame Judy. I mean, it's ridiculous. But I mean, I blush and I go cold at the memory of having to do it. But she was unbelievably gracious and so much fun, always so much fun, and always such a sense of play and lightness about her, just joy. And even now, she's 78, she's losing her sight. She just changes the room when she walks in. She's an extraordinary human being. And those people, one, are just fortunate to have lived during their lifetimes and have come into contact with them. That's just something one should be grateful for. It's the same with Bond. You have to know everything Bond has done. You have to know everywhere he's been, every action sequence, because you can't repeat it. And you're, in a way, playing a sly game all the time with the audience of showing, of taking them just up to where they expect to go, and then going in a slightly different direction. So you're not trying to reinvent the wheel, because you have to deliver the aspirational aspects of a Bond movie, glamour, beautiful women, action, all those things. But
out of interest, have you always been a fan of Bond, or were you dragged into it kicking and screaming?
I was a fan of the early Bonds, and I grew up with Roger. Roger Moore was my Live and Let Die I remember very clearly. And this is very pretentious, but Sartre has a great phrase. He says, a man's work is nothing more or less than the slow trek to rediscover through the detours of art those 2 or 3 great and simple images in the presence of which his heart first opened. And to me, Live and Let Die, I know it sounds incredibly bizarre, but for me it was adult sexuality, it was weird glamour, it was violence, it was racially very odd. It's a very unsound movie now if you look at it, I'm afraid. He starts off in Harlem, and it's all the bad guys are black and all the good guys are white. I mean, it's very odd, but it has much about it that's really haunting and really powerful, and I really like that. And on top of that, the greatest boat chase ever shot. And that was a pivotal moment for me, and that was because I was, again, 10, and I remember going to the movies to see that. And again, I think the other thing is that, and I regret this for the generation, my children's generation now, is that the act of going to a movie then was going to a movie. You went to the cinema, you sat down, it went dark, and you were in presence of an 80-foot screen, and there it was. You couldn't switch it off, you couldn't pause it, it wasn't on telly, it wasn't in the corner. You got one Bond movie a year, if you remember, at Christmas, and then everyone gathered round to see that and the Morecambe and Wise, But other than that, you didn't see those movies, and they weren't special, and they're no longer special events. And I wanted to recreate that feeling that I had as a 12-year-old of being at a special event, and everything about it being magnificent. And that, to me, is what Bond should still be. Doesn't live in the CGI world. It doesn't live in a fantasy world. It lives 1 foot in the real world and 1 foot in fantasy in a way that almost no other genre does. It's not Marvel on the one hand, nor is it Bourne on the other. It's right in the middle, and it's its own thing, and you have to respect that and understand it tonally to get it right, I think.
Are there 1 or 2 out there that we don't know about?
What, rushed straight to video, you mean? The great frustration of my filmmaking life was a film called Jarhead, which I believe, even now, has the makings of a great movie. But in the way that the studio system works, if you work on a movie that costs a lot of money, you were always chasing a release date, and we were just entirely crushed by our release date. I had to give the movie over before it was finished, before I thought it was finished. And I can't watch that movie. When I see it on television, I have to turn it off because it frustrates me, the possibilities that are still there. And even now, occasionally, if I'm trying to get to sleep at night, I think, how would I recut those sequences in, and go around? Because there's something very, it's like a Rubik's Cube, a film that you haven't solved. It's like putting a puzzle down that you haven't completed. And it just keeps pulling at your brain, even years afterwards. So you have odd relationships, and it's like, each one you've loved like a child and you have to say goodbye to. But some of them you're happy to say goodbye to, and you feel they're going to be out there in the world making a good life for themselves and having a good career and, you know, having a nice family and children. And some of you think, my God, I don't know where that one's going to end up. It's going to end up in the gutter, you know. And that's how it feels. You know, you love them equally, but you don't know what they're going to be like in future life.
Yeah, it's a luck of the draw sometimes, isn't it? Really,
Yeah.
just timing and everything. So, you mentioned you started out at Cambridge, where you learnt the craft as such. Are there people that were around at the same time that you're still working with now? I mean, having developed those relationships at Cambridge?
Yes, I mean, Cambridge was a astonishingly wonderful place because you're left to your own devices. As you know, you just, you know, I restarted the College Drama Society. I said, is there a theatre here? They said, yeah, we haven't used it for years, you know. I said, could I, yeah, do whatever you want, you know, here's £100 and go, you know. And we put on plays and I made mistakes and that's how I learned. But my generation, my leading actor of that era was Tom Hollander, who now some of you will know from his fantastic TV series Rev, which is on BBC Two. But, you know, the generation above me was Simon Russell Beale and Emma Thompson and Stephen Fry and Hugh Laurie and that lot. Many of those relationships have continued, particularly my relationship with Simon Russell Beale, who I've directed in 8, 9 different plays over the years, and most recently King Lear at the National, which closed a couple of weeks ago. And then, you know, one of my oldest friends, for example, Pippa Harris, who I went to school with, she was at the Oxford High School, I was at Magdalen College School in Oxford, and I met her when she was 12 and I was 14. She now runs Neal Street Productions with me and produces Call the Midwife and Penny Dreadful and the Hollow Crown series that we produce for the BBC of the Shakespeare's history plays committed to film. And that's a relationship that, I mean, I've known each other 35 years. And we were at university together too. So those relationships have gone on, and they're the ones, of course, that mean the most. And they're the ones that ground you. You know, you do go off and go to extraordinary places and do unusual things, but you always know that those people are back here.
I mean, so you've worked in actually different type, so the screen and stage, but I mean, is there a particular medium which you enjoy the most or you find the most challenging?
Oh, I'll always feel theatre is home. I feel more comfortable in a rehearsal room, but that's partly because it's such a private thing. You know, film is very public. It's public in every respect, but particularly if you're directing a Bond movie. And I was saying to somebody earlier, you know, one of the things I had to get my head around on Bond is not only the number of people on set at any given time, and I'm talking about, you know, obviously thousands of extras, but an enormous crew and often shooting on 6, 7 cameras. And so the lack of privacy and the white noise that surrounds the whole production. You know, what's going to happen, who's in it, you know, what's the plot, and people constantly, every day, a story in the Sun, the Mail, printing, you know, such and such is Blofeld, or such and such is the baddie, or such and such is going to die. And in fact, in actual fact, in the last movie, they got the piece of information correct about halfway through production that Judy was going to die in the movie. But there had been so many wrong stories printed that nobody believed them. They were, oh, no, she's never going to die, she'll be fine, you know, and nobody believed it. But actually, they actually got it correct. But trying to cut out that white noise is very difficult.
Has anybody not seen Skyfall, by the way?
Oh, I've ruined it. Spoiler, I should have said spoiler alert.
I was actually really impressed. It took me a couple of months before I got there, and nobody had let on.
Nobody told you?
Nobody had let on. I thought it was a really well-kept secret by everybody that they didn't pass on that particular information.
Well, when my friend was queuing to see it in New York, on the first day opening night in New York, there was a guy on a bicycle who'd been to the matinee, was cycling up and down shouting, "Judi Dench dies, she gets shot," you know. And he was like, no, nobody wanted to believe it. You know, I think that's partly it. But I think that with film, you know, I mean, at one point, you know, they rather shamefacedly came up to me. I was doing a scene in Istanbul, and they said, just to let you know, there'll be 50 members of the press on set tomorrow. We'll keep them out of your way, but it's a promised set visit. And you think, 50? Where are they going to put them, you know? And we were in a market square in the centre of Istanbul, and, you know, I was in the middle of doing the scene the next day, and I looked over, and behind this chain-link fence, you know, there were 50 journalists, all with notepads, watching me talking to Daniel and thinking, I wonder what he's saying. And you realise there has to be an element of directing a Bond that's performance. You can't be shy and in a corner. You have to get the megaphone out and you have to do it, you know what I mean? And it took me a couple of weeks to get used to the public nature of directing it. Theatre is much more controllable, is much more peaceful, and is more relaxing as a consequence. Sometimes it's not as much of a challenge, and the thing that keeps you going with film is that you can shoot anywhere, any story. There are no holes barred, you know what I mean? And the scale can vary massively, and it's full of challenges. Theatre is a little less full of challenges, but it's no less difficult, you know.
So, and were you surprised by the reaction to Skyfall, as a matter of interest?
Yes, I was. I mean, I think I'd hoped that it would do. You know, Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace were seen by approximately the same number of people. So I looked at that and I thought, well, it should have gone up with Quantum, and so maybe if you put Quantum there, then we'll be here, you know. But it went way, way beyond what I imagined, and I think we were lucky. And I think that the two biggest film successes in my life have been partly to do with that kind of capturing lightning in a bottle moment. American Beauty was very much of its time. It was very much of the Clinton era. You know, we were all obsessed with, you know, presidents and interns, older men and younger women. It was just shortly after that terrible bombing, shooting in the school. There was a lot of obsession about what people were doing in building bombs in the garages next door to them, and suburbia not being as safe a place as you thought it might be. It was just in the air. And I think 2 or 3 years later, post 9/11, the film might have appeared a bit more navel-gazing in a way, a bit more self-obsessed. And it just had a moment. And Skyfall was the same. You know, from the moment that I thought, hang on a minute, that means it's going to come out in Olympic year, you know, and I watched that opening ceremony, and there was Daniel and the Queen. I thought, you know, I think we may be okay. I think it's our time. You know what I mean? It just felt like all of it. And the odd thing was that I went to the Olympics. It was a great, great time, I think. I mean, even now I feel nostalgic about it. And I was at Super Saturday, thanks to one of the sponsors of Bond. We managed to get myself, my son, and my dad, and we watched Mo Farah win the 10,000 meters, and it was it was the best sporting event, and I go to lots of sporting events, way the best of my life. To be able to say to my son, that is what sport's about. It's not about rich footballers swearing at the camera. It's not about money. It's not about, you know, advertising and commercial. It's about just endeavor, human endeavor, and being the best, and that is the best, you know. And it was just thrilling, and to have 80,000 people shouting for one man. It was, you know, we were all crying. I mean, my son was crying, I was crying. And then I went back into the cutting rooms, and the feeling around London and the feeling around England changed the way I cut the movie. It genuinely did, because I would not have been as confident in the nationalism and the pride that's in the film, in the feeling about England. You know, it's really worth something, had I not been through Olympic year. So the whole thing kind of fed into it, and it in a very interesting way, which I've never experienced before. There I was in the middle of London, you know, cutting it in Soho, and there was Olympic fever all around me, and it was very moving, and it's in the film, and so I think it's very much, again, of its time.
Fantastic. And what about the future? Are there any? I know you're working on the next one busily.
Yes.
So,
yes.
And that's presumably that's an interesting challenge, having to follow up from that. And
it's a big challenge. Yeah, it's a very big challenge, and I think that you know, for me, the moment I understood that I could tell the second part of that story in some way, and that I felt that Daniel was in agreement with me, Daniel Craig, I thought I need to do it, because for me, I'd introduced Rafe as the new M. I'd introduced Ben Whishaw as Q. I'd introduced Naomi Harris as Moneypenny. And I felt we had taken Bond to a place where, for the first time, people actually aged, people actually were getting older and dying, and that there was a sense of time passing. And so it had come out of this bubble of timelessness, and somehow, you know, which you feel about, you know, Doctor Who, another great character who regenerates, that somehow time is meaningless. I mean, he's a Time Lord, so that's different. But, you know, even in Bond, you know, it feels like, well, it doesn't really matter, you know. And I thought, no, I can tell, I need to tell what happened, I need to say what happened next, for the next year, or next 2 years. And that's really what the movie is. And to me, once I got that, I got excited, started to get excited. And then it's all about script. You know, we had a big stroke of luck on Skyfall, which is that MGM, which is one of the studios that, is the studio that finances it, went bankrupt. And so for 9 months while it was in bankruptcy, we weren't officially allowed to work on the movie, but we were able to work on the script for 9 months in peace and quiet. And that's why the movie is good, because it had a good script. And anyone who tells you you can do it on the floor, when you get on the floor, you only do the first 2 acts, is talking nonsense. It has to be on the page. And if it's not on the page, it won't ever be on the screen. So the most important thing for me is what we're doing now, which is just hammering it out. And it's quite grueling, but it's fun and it's challenging, you know, and it's satisfying when you get it right.
Fantastic. Well, we wish you the very best of luck with that and everything else that comes your way.
Thank
And
you
Sam,
very
thank you very
much.
much, Steve, for sharing your stories.
Very enjoyable. Thank you.
Sam Mendes, thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you. That's brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. Well, I hope, ladies and gentlemen, that this evening has given you a brief insight into the work of the charity so far, because, of course, the work is ongoing. And there are still divided communities out there. There are still young people in challenging circumstances and young people who want to go out and tell their stories. And, of course, they don't do it on their own. We have a number of individuals who mentor the young filmmakers, one of whom is here this evening. I think Richard Blanchard, I think, is hiding in the audience somewhere. Where is Richard? Where is he? I can't see with this light. He's waving, is he? Anyway, Richard, thank you very much. Richard does... Richard is a cameraman, and I think he probably had something to do with the filming of the trailer that you saw earlier on, but does a lot of work with the young people, teaching them the techniques of the camera. And forgive me, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time of the evening, but she who must be obeyed has also asked me to single out a few of you who've gone the extra mile to make this evening possible. And Emra from Swissair, I think we got the gist of what Swissair does, I think. Do you? Yes. Right, Emra, thank you very much indeed. Also to Nicole Rollet, who's very generously provided the wines this evening, which I hope you'll be able to enjoy in a few minutes. Claire Leach, who has done the brochure and all the scribbling and amongst other things. Katie Schaff, who's been a great volunteer. Thank you, Katie. Simon Hunt, who does the website. If you ever manage to get to the website, have a look at that, Simon, and a few other things. And Jessica Rothschild, wholehearted support from, and we look forward to joining forces with Jessica out in Los Angeles, I think, which is brilliant news. We look forward to that. Thank you, Jessica. And there is one person who I understand has possibly done more than anyone else in helping to organise this evening, and she may have been doing it for work experience, but has been in the office every day, and I wondered if Danielle Rollet would like to come up to the stage, because we have a little something. Where is Danielle hiding? Where she's hiding over there. Brilliant. Danielle, would you like to come up? Just a little something to say thank you for being the best help and support anyone could have. Where is it, Jill? Where have you gone?
To be fair, this is pretty much the best thing I possibly could have done. So.
No, but thank you very much indeed. No, you've been a fantastic help. Thank you very much indeed. Jill, are you there somewhere? Oh, she's coming. Oh, look, no, it's not Jill at all. It's Amberley. There you go. Sunflowers for you. Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed, Danielle. Thank you for all the input. Brilliant. Brilliant. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for being a lovely audience, for taking the time to hear more about Films Without Borders, and in so doing, I hope we may have convinced you to continue supporting us in the future. And everything you give, as Jill has said, will enable more films to be made by young people who would never otherwise have the opportunity. So a very big thank you to you all. And thank you very much indeed, everybody. Thank you so much. Thank you. Is this a certificate to say that I've been here? Thank you very much indeed, Emily. That's very kind. Thank you very much. Thank you.